Okay, when we do biological classification, a common name that will pop up is this character here, Carl Linnaeus. He came up with a system of putting different species into different groups, and the purpose of it was to help people to identify species and to see similarities between them as well. So the system he's used here, there's 7 groups, or we call each group a taxon, or all of them together is called taxa. And you've probably seen these ones before. The different kingdoms he identified were the plants, animals, fungi, the protoctista, and the prokaryotes. So you need to know what those different groups are and what features that they have. So the plants, they are multicellular, they're autotrophs, which means they're producing their own foods. The animals, they're also multicellular, they're heterotrophic, so they're having to actually consume food in some form and digest it to get the energy from it. Fungi are neither autotrophic or heterotrophic. They don't ingest food. They're saprophytic, which means they're releasing enzymes onto the food source. So it's part of the decay process. And then to confuse things a bit, the protoctista, well, they're single-celled. Oh, by the way, fungi, they can be single-celled or multicellular. So you've got single-celled yeast, or you've got multicellular. The obvious one would be like mushrooms. Protoctista, single-celled, and they can be heterotrophic and autotrophic. So this is a funny group here because it tends to be a group which is, it's hard to put them into plants, animals, or fungi. So this is quite a big, vague group, the protoctista. Then you've got the prokaryotes, which we tend to think of as the single-celled bacteria, and these could be heterotrophic or autotrophic as well. So one big difference that Carl Linnaeus identified was that these first 4 groups, they have a nucleus, and this one here doesn't. So that was just the overview, just to get a rough idea. What rough group should we put some of these organisms in? So far we've only got 5 groups, yet there's an estimated 1 trillion species on the planet. They've not all been discovered, but there's a lot. So these are very big groups that contain millions, potentially millions of different species. So if you want to identify, be more specific, then there are subdivisions. So a phylum is a subdivision of a kingdom. So if we were to give an example of some of the phylums for the animal kingdom, one of them is the vertebrates or the invertebrates, or we say the vertebrates are a phylum called the chordata. They've got some sort of spinal cord and a vertebral column. And then if you want to be more specific, you go from phylum, a subdivision of a phylum is the class. So the group's getting more specific. So what could the different classes of the vertebrates be? Well, you probably remember things like fish, mammals, reptiles, birds. And then a subdivision of class is the order, and then family is a subdivision of order, genus is a subdivision of family, and then when we get down to the very bottom, we are at one particular organism, and species is a group of organisms which can reproduce and produce fertile offspring if they're able to sexually reproduce. That's when it's confusing. Not all species sexually reproduce, but that will do for now, that definition of species being able to reproduce to produce fertile offspring. All right, so let's have a look at how this is helpful for us. So if we were to read through this, I wonder if we can figure out what organism this could be. So it has a nucleus, but no cell wall. It's multicellular, heterotrophic, and can usually move around. Well, I wonder what kingdom that is, if it can do those things. It has a spinal cord surrounded by a vertebral column. It has mammary glands, and females can produce milk. has a large brain, and usually has good colour vision and erect posture, and can use tools and communicates through language. So you can see as we go down from, we'll talk about domain in a minute, as we go down from kingdom, phylum, class, the information is getting much more specific. And this sounds like it could be a human, and you'd be right to think that. And so far, where we are now, if we go through it, we've gone from the kingdom being animal, the phylum is the chordata, the class is Mammalia, the order is the primates, and now we're in a family called the Hominidae, which is a kind of a human-like family we're in. But all this information doesn't just represent humans. We're still talking about gorillas, chimpanzees, and orangutans. And this is interesting. This hominidae, this human-like features, this is an argument as to why lots of groups are saying that gorillas, chimpanzees, and orangutans should be given the same human rights as us. All right. So then, what then makes humans stand out from these three groups here? What is the defining feature that puts us into this genus of Homo and species sapiens, as we call Homo sapiens? Well, one thing we've got very good ability to use our hands. We've got opposable thumbs, fully opposable thumbs, and we've got good dexterity with our hands and powerful grip. This is what makes us stand out from those other groups, and it's allowed us to develop more, making more intricate tools, and to the point where we are now. Let's have a talk about, we've not mentioned this yet, something called the domain. So when Carl Linnaeus came up with these groups, he just said, right, all single-celled organisms with no nucleus, you are considered the prokaryotes. And then around 1990, another scientist called Carl Woese, let's just write his name. He came up with the domain system. So, although it was already acknowledged that plants, animals, fungi, and Protoctista, that they have a nucleus, and prokaryotes don't, these were considered to be called eukaryotic. These are eukaryotic features. Any cell which has a nucleus is eukaryotic. So we've now got a new, higher taxon called a domain, and we could say that these first four here are considered to be eukarya. So these all have a major thing in common. They've all got a nucleus. Whereas the prokaryotes now, this Carl Woese, he found a really major difference. He said we can't put all the prokaryotes into one group. And it was all to do with when he studied their RNA, he was seeing some major differences at a genetic level, on RNA level. And that's so major that actually, when he had done his division, so now we get rid of prokaryote, we've got two new kingdoms. We've got archaea bacteria, and we've got eubacteria. And the differences between these two are so big that actually the archaea bacteria have more in common with eukarya than they do with the eubacteria. So that was a really major finding. So now we've got two new domains. We've got a new domain called archaea. That should be a C. And one more here. called bacteria. Right, so this is the modern classification hierarchy. We've moved from 7 taxon to 8. The domain is given an even broader classification system of those which have a nucleus and those which don't, and also it's looking now at what's happening at an RNA level. And we talk about RNA, this is all to do with protein synthesis. Depending on how the RNA behaves is going to dictate what proteins are being made as well. So this is really, we're going right back to the very beginning. This is big differences between the archaea and the bacteria. You need to know the different features of these different kingdoms. So that's something just to have a look through, just practicing, draw out your own table to try and see what you can remember. We need to be aware that as you move down this classification system, these are all subdivisions of each other and they're getting more specific. From from kingdom down to species, you need to know what this order is. So you can come up with your own mnemonic to do this. I just found it easier just to remember it: kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. But if you can come up with some sort of memorable sentence to help you with that, that's fine. But that has to be something that you've got to spend time trying to remember. Okay, last sort of thing, just to make sure it's all covered. We went through an example of how the classification system works. So this is following what we are. We're Homo sapiens. And if you work your way back, you can see how we've got a lot in common with these organisms here. And this links to evolution, tells us that there's some sort of common ancestor that we share because we've got so many similarities. And if we go further back, there's lots of animals which don't look anything like us, but they've got features that we have, which will make you, hopefully you just start to question, why is that? Why is it an organism that looks so different to me? Why is it doing similar functions to me? I wonder if I have a similar ancestor to that organism as well. And we work our way all the way back to a cellular level.